Deriving the quadratic formula. So I'm going to start off with a general quadratic equation in standard form, ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0, where the a, b, and c are the coefficients. Now the quadratic formula is a formula that's derived from completing the square. And the idea is it's a time saver, so you don't have to complete the square every single time you're solving a quadratic formula. Some people still like to do that. But I'm going to show you how this guy right here is transformed into the quadratic formula by deriving it. Okay, so we're going to be completing the square on this trinomial. So first step is to subtract the constant term, so minus c, and that will give us ax squared plus bx, and then equals negative c. Then divide both sides by a, which is the leading coefficient, and these a's simplify out. So we have x squared plus bx over a equals negative c over a. All I did was I took this quadratic equation in standard form, where a, b, and c are the coefficients, and then I subtracted the constant term and then divided by the leading coefficient. This is something you've done for writing functions in vertex form and also solving by completing the square. Okay, now what I need to do is I need to figure out what the new constant term has to be to make a perfect square trinomial. So I need to take this b over a, and then what we do, we divide by 2 and then square it. So how do you divide by 2 when you have b over a? Well, you can just put the 2 in the denominator like that, and then square it. So that's the same thing as b squared over, and this 2 applies to the 2 and the a in the denominator, so 2 squared is 4, and a squared is a squared. Okay, now this looks a little complicated, but this is what you add to both sides now to complete the square. So x squared plus bx over a plus b squared over 4a squared equals negative c over a plus b squared over 4a squared. Okay, now this is really starting to look like a mess, but it's going to clean up here real fast, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this left and write it as a perfect square binomial. So it's going to be x plus b over 2a squared. Okay? And I've got this b over 2a from right here. So remember, you take that middle coefficient, divide by 2, and that tells you what needs to go here in the perfect square. Equals. Then while I'm at it, I need to deal with this situation here. We need a common denominator. So it's a and then 4a squared. So I need to multiply this first fraction, negative c over a, multiply by 4a over 4a. That's going to make a 4a squared denominator, because a times 4a makes 4a squared. So negative c times 4a is negative 4a and then c. And as soon as I see negative 4ac, that makes me think quadratic formula, so I'm on the right track here. Divided by 4a squared. Okay, so this is the same thing as this negative c over a is negative 4ac all over 4a squared. And plus b squared over 4a squared. Okay, so now I'm going to switch the order. I'm going to use the commutative property of addition, because we have a negative term then a positive. We want the positive term to go first. So this x plus b over 2a squared equals b squared minus 4ac all over 4a squared. So what I did is I switched the order, and I also combined because we have the common denominator. Now this b squared minus 4ac, hey, that's the quadratic formula right there. That's called the discriminant. So we're getting close. Now I'm going to finish solving for x by taking the square root of both sides. So x plus b over 2a equals plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4ac over 4a squared. And I should make this radical sign go down further. That's all one big square root. Going over here, x plus b over 2a equals plus or minus, and this 4a squared is a perfect square because 2 times 2 is 4 and a times a makes a squared. So I can simplify b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So I simplified this radical in the denominator. Okay, I took this radical 4a squared and made it just 2a without the radical. So radical 4a squared, or square root of 4a squared, is 2a, because 2 times 2 makes 4, and a times a makes a squared. Okay, so now to finish this up, I'm going to subtract b over 2a from both sides to solve for x. And that's going to leave x equals, and then the negative b over 2a plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And the last final step, since we have common denominator, we're just going to add this together. X equals negative b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how you derive the quadratic formula.